Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Maryland Comptroller Peter Franchot has been out on the Eastern Shore. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush, and he's in our studio this morning. Welcome to the program.
Don, it's a great honor to be here with you, and thank you for your long coverage of the shore. It's, it's a true benefit to the state to have you here, and thank you for talking to me.
Well, I've got to ask you about the big story of the day, which is obviously stuff coming out of Charlottesville, the violence there, the president's response. When you saw particularly the events that took place in Charlottesville, what was your own personal reaction? Where were you? What were your thoughts?
Well, I would rather communicate the thoughts of my dad, who's 95 years old. He was a B-24 bomber pilot for the Navy during World War II. He lives over near me in Montgomery County, and he turned to me and said, as a World War II vet, I cannot believe that there are people with Nazi insignia marching he saw it all on the cable shows, marching down the street, chanting anti-Semitic Nazi garbage, and he was really upset. He said, I don't know what the rest of the World War II vets, not that a lot of us are still alive, but he was appalled, and I think that basically summarizes my response to what's going on down there. And I hope that cooler heads will prevail in Washington, and that we can somehow get a message of that these hate groups are going to be investigated, hopefully rounded up, and somehow brought back to reality, because Nazi groups, KKK groups, they're no good guys in those organizations. So I don't know. I don't mean to go on and on. I'm the state comptroller. I don't really have any control over all that stuff. But I do return to the basic view that I have, that I've made 9,000 or 10,000 visits to small businesses and wonderful volunteer organizations around the state over the last 10 years, and I've seen the goodness of the Maryland public, be they Clinton supporters or Trump supporters. They're good people, and they do all sorts of wonderful volunteer, help your neighbor, help your community, strengthen your home. There are people all over the state that are doing the right thing. I just hate to see the wrong images up there on the TV set.
Because here in Maryland, we had, the removal of the statue for Justice Roger Taney, who was obviously the author of the 1857 Dred Scott decision. And the governor himself has been pretty outspoken about not only getting rid of that monument, but also to what's been going on.
I salute Governor Hogan. I think he examples the right kind of leadership in a crisis like this, and I frankly support whatever efforts there are now to remove these monuments and put them in museums or do whatever, but they're no longer memorials that, as we used to think of them, they're magnets for the KKK and neo-Nazis, and I don't think we should put up with it. We just put them somewhere where they can be used as educational items, and I return to my point. These are domestic terrorists, these groups, and it's not just the Nazis and the KKK. There are hundreds of these groups that are out there, and they threaten the safety and health of Americans. They all ought to be investigated, scrutinized, audited, looked at, sued, put in prison, hopefully, if justice prevails. And we need to really expunge them from our society, because they've gotten a whole wind at their back, I guess, from this Charlottesville thing.
Do you think there's a shift going on in the country in the sense that we're now seeing a number of cities taking down these kinds of monuments? We saw it obviously in Baltimore. Richmond is looking now seriously at doing that. Does that represent something else going on in the country that perhaps?
No, I think that's I think that's just a defensive maneuver by good local officials who say we don't want to bring these awful people into our town, and these statutes which have relatively been benign and accepted by everybody over the years, they have become new magnets for these extremists, and we're not going to let them come in and do what they did in Charlottesville. And obviously the young woman who was killed in the automobile drive-through terrorist act, our sympathies go out to her and all the injured people. But the key thing to remember here is my father, 95 years old, he went and fought the Nazis, and what's he get for it? He gets a bunch of kooks down there with tiki torches walking around trying to terrorize people with all sorts of chants about how much they hate the Jews and how much they love Hitler. They all ought to be arrested and kept away from normal society, because they're just horrible people who no more have a First Amendment right to do that than somebody has the right to stand up in a crowded theater and say incorrectly, there's a fire, and people get hurt as they scramble for the exits. This is a historic moment for America, and we need to take these hate groups, wherever they are, whoever they are, and the Southern Poverty Law Center's got a list of them. It's not just the KKK and the neo-Nazis. There are lots of these groups, and they all need to be rounded up because they're a threat to the United States.
Finally, at this point, before we move on, what was your reaction
Why'd
to?
you ask me what I really think?
What was your response or your reaction to how the president handled this?
Well, it's a disgrace. I think Senator Corker and other Republicans are beginning to wake up that this person is completely incompetent and mentally unbalanced and is inadequate to the job of being president and has to go. And we'll just wait and see how the process winds itself out. But ultimately, he is a narcissist. And I just hope that the military, I was mentioning beforehand, Don, how ironic it is that I, as a child of the 60s, we were so concerned about the military and the Vietnam War, even though I served in the Army. The climate back then was the military is, a problem. Well, now we're relying upon the Joint Chiefs of Staff to please control the President of the United States, because he's just unbalanced and unhinged enough to start a nuclear conflict, in my humble opinion, in order to glorify his narcissism and elevate himself to some weird platform that he'd like to be on, and also to get Mueller and all that stuff off his back. So I hope the military and I hope the responsible leaders in Washington have got a plan B that will prevent the president from, along with that guy over in North Korea who's kind of like him, I think, Kim Jong-un. Here we have two 12-year-old kids with bad haircuts basically threatening the stability and the health of the entire world. And both of them obviously lack stability and lack whatever it is that normal people have. And I just hope that the military and other people in Washington, people like Senator Corker, put their foot down and say, this has got to stop. We're not going to allow it. We're not going to obey this crazy guy's commands, because he's obviously not able to be president. And so we'll see how the process works. I think we've got a great country with a great system. I don't mean to be, for those folks out there that happen to think Trump is a great guy, it's not a question of us. We Americans, we Marylanders are fine. We work together in our communities. Our kids go to the same schools. We just happen to have someone in this highest office of the land who he's emboldened all these neo-Nazis groups and KKK groups, and it's an outrage. But we, I think, have the resilience in our system to deal with it. I just want everybody to be on the alert that this is not a normal situation.
I want to turn to craft beer. Big big thing here on the Eastern Shore. You've been promoting it. You've been out maybe sipping a bit of it, as I understand. And you've got a reform on a TAP task force. Tell us a little bit about what you see in terms of future, in terms of craft beer, and whether or not you're going to see regulations change, because I know there's a big fight, or a big move, at least in Annapolis earlier.
Well, I'm lucky to be the comptroller of the state of Maryland, and as the comptroller, I'm the chief regulator of the state's alcohol laws, and we have a wonderful craft beer industry and sector in the state, 80 local breweries, led by Evo right here in Salisbury, but there are probably a dozen breweries on the shore, and all of them are wonderfully entrepreneurial and innovative. The problem is that over the decades since Prohibition ended, there have all sorts of regulations and laws have been passed putting impediments in the way of these breweries. It tells them what hours they can have their tap rooms open, how much beer they can produce, how much they can sell, this, that, and the other thing. It's a crazy kind of patchwork of problem legislation. So my goal as the comptroller is to have all these task force members that we've got meet a number of times. We've already met 4 or 5 times. We've got another couple of meetings, and then we're going to present a list of recommendations to the legislature on how to make Maryland the #1 state in the country for craft brewers all around the country. Why? A, it's billions of dollars in economic activity. B, it really improves the state's business reputation. C, it attracts millennials and young people from all over the country if we really do a good job of promoting Maryland as a welcoming, appreciative state. And it's just a really, it would be a very positive thing for the state of Maryland. Plus, it's enormously popular with the citizens because they like to partake. And yes, from time to time, I have to pay a site visit and sample the products. And I say, you don't have to have a craft beer to have a good time, but why take a chance? So anyway, we've got this big effort underway. The alcohol incumbent companies in the 3-tier system basically run Annapolis. They don't even talk about the legislators anymore. They just talk about what we, the alcohol industry, will let you, Mr. Comptroller, do for these craft brewers. Well, we're going to turn the tables, and we're going to promote the free enterprise system. I think that it will be very dramatic, what we propose. I think we will suggest also that there be a big economic development strategy built around the craft in Maryland. If it's made in Maryland, beer, craft beer, or craft distilleries, or craft wineries, if it's made in Maryland, we need to advertise that around the country. So that's the goal. Look, I've been around the legislature enough to know it may not make it through the legislature in this upcoming session. But I guarantee you personally that this will be one of the top issues in the 2018 elections at the local and state level. And we're going to rally, we talked earlier about President Trump. This issue of beer combines the Trump and Clinton supporters in a coalition the likes of which the state has never seen, and we're going to unleash it on the 2018 election. Why? It's a nonpartisan, pragmatic, creates jobs and economic growth, wildly popular sector. And when I mention that it's a $1 billion sector, it could be a $2, $3, $4 billion sector if we just got out of the way and stopped harassing them with all these state laws.
I want to turn, by the way, to education. The governor plans to, I read, summon local school officials to make their case for the construction money. I know there's been some criticism, and Nancy Conference, the treasurer, says that she feels that this could politicize the issue. What's your sense about that?
Gee, I'm shocked that us politicians would politicize something. That's really unusual. But here's what's going on. The governor and I believe that the Board of Public Works should be a transparent, accountable forum for individuals and local communities to come up and tell us what they need as far as the school construction dollars. And historically, we've been kind of added in at the end as a rubber stamp. We had this appeal process that the legislature tried to remove the Board of Public Works from. So in response to that, the governor announced on Wednesday that last week that we're going to have a begathon, so to speak, for better or for less. We're going to move it up to October 18th. And he has asked all the local school jurisdictions to come in and tell us, the Board of Public Works, what they need for school construction for their local communities. The key here is that he will not have presented his budget with the dollar amount for school construction in it. So that is now up for grabs as far as these petitioners, and they're all going to have to come in. I'm going to demand that the state senators and the state delegates and the county executives and the delegates, whoever the local elected officials are, that they come in and also participate. So it could be a long day on October 18th, but the point is that we want to focus attention on giving a voice to the locals and not just have this done behind closed doors in Annapolis with folks that are just have many, many different conflicting agenda items. And we want to have it out in the open. And I am 1,000% with the governor on this issue of changing the school construction review and giving it some teeth. That's what he did in this with this action, because he's basically going to say what you say and who you turn out in support of it is going to determine what you get.
Let me ask you about that, because one of the things that struck me is that Governor Hogan, much of his support is in the rural areas, the Eastern Shore, for example. So I'm sure that somebody's could be sitting in Baltimore saying, well, if you go through this process, maybe the governor's going to be shaving it towards the people that, or the areas that have supported him, like the Eastern Shore, which we would then obviously benefit from. How do we ensure that those kinds of calculations don't?
Well, that's a good example, because both Dorchester, one of the most economically challenged areas in the state of Maryland, and Baltimore City, one of the most economically challenged areas, both of them have managed to invigorate their local economies enough that they are both scheduled under the normal school construction formula to get less school construction money because they have higher property values. So they have done economically what the state really wants them to do, which is improve their local economies. What's their reward? They get their school construction reduced. This new date and new review by the governor allows him to say, maybe we shouldn't punish Dorchester and Baltimore City for doing well with their economies by giving them less money. Maybe we should give them as much or more money as a reward and an incentive. So that's just an example of what we've got going here. It is crime. The system currently is arbitrary, and I guess you could describe it as artificial. What we're describing is something that's real, that's responsive, that protects the taxpayers and gives them a voice.
Now, we've just finished really the Shop Maryland Tax-Free Week, and one of the things I was interested in was that there's some suggestion that you might want to try to broaden this sales tax, perhaps even some kind of graduated process. What's your thinking about? Do you see expanding this?
Yes, I do, and I think it would be of great interest to the public. Now, these tax-free shopping weeks are described by the elite in Annapolis as political gimmicks, primarily Franchot's folly, they call it. But it is actually, the data shows that even though we lose $6.5 million in sales tax revenue during the week, we make up most of that through additional shopping for items that are not covered by the 6% sales tax waiver. So what I'm interested in exploring is finding that sweet spot of where you can reduce taxes as a loss leader, but not damage the state's revenue, which are important for education, healthcare, and all the things that we care about. So Yeah, I'm suggesting that they could expand the 7 days to perhaps 10 or even 14 days. They could expand the list of items. It's not really back to school right now. It's any item of clothing or shoes that's less than $100 is eligible. It doesn't have to be for a young person. It can be for an adult. So it's an enormously successful, popular stimulus to local shopping during the dog days of August, and to the extent we can expand it without crossing that line of ruining the revenues, I think that's an important area, and we could look at it. And the legislature expanded it to backpacks, but they only put in like $40, not the $100. I mean, let's be a little bolder and see where that balancing point is. And once we've reached there, I think we can back off a little bit. But yeah, it's a great idea. I know a lot of my conservative friends want it 52 weeks a year. No, that's not going to work. We don't want to bankrupt the state. But there is an opportunity here to use this in a way that benefits everybody.
Before I let you go, have a talk about next year's elections. Obviously, you're going to be up. Governor Larry Hogan is going to be up. He seems to be still fairly popular. Some have suggested that there are a couple of elements in his favor, including that he does attract what's been considered to be, say, disaffected blue-collar or suburban whites, as well as having sort of this personal brand of as being affable, bipartisan, pragmatic. Is that a tough one for the Democrats to beat? Because after all, you are a Democrat.
Well, absolutely, and I'm a proud Democrat, and I'll support the Democratic nominee, and everybody's aware of that. And but the situation with I have worked with Governor Hogan on a number of nonpartisan common sense issues, like fully funding the pension and school after Labor Day, which now is the law
That's
of the
right.
land. And I know a lot of people thought that was a crazy idea. Well, now it's the law, and it's going to be hugely successful. And a number of fiscal issues that he and I have worked on, and I think that's what the public wants. Now we're entering this hyper-partisan political year, 2018, and yes, he will have his hands full, but yes, you're right, he's very popular. We'll see who emerges from the Democratic side, and I would be happy to support them. I've always been a Democrat. I'll die a Democrat. Hope folks on the shore don't hold that against me. But I think the key here is for, outside of the election process, the relationship that the governor and I have on these issues that concern people. These are real issues that have nothing to do with Democratic or Republican ideology. And there's a long list of them that he and I have worked together on at the Board of Public Works, and I think that's what they want. Whoever wins the elections, I think the public, Republicans and Democrats and independents, they want their elected officials to work on behalf of them.
How do you get that when you're heading into an election like this? I mean, I talked to the state party chair recently, Kathleen Matthews, and trying to kind of get a sense about what is the opening edge to, say, if you're running against Governor Larry Hogan, and I did get some interesting talking points, but I never found an issue that would say, oh, okay, this is where Hogan might be vulnerable. That this is where somebody, a Democrat, might say, I will do better. I mean, is it just simply
the Democrats, in order to revive our party, and we're kind of on our heels in the state of Maryland, we need to go out and recruit good local candidates, individuals of stature in the community. We have to stop demolishing them as soon as they announce by saying that they're not this or not that. And we need to get back to kind of the basics of producing democratic ideas and a party and candidates that are appealing to the voters. Right now we have huge geographic areas in Maryland where there's no elected Democrat. And that's outrageous, particularly on the shore.
The Eastern Shore, yeah.
Well, we have a long, storied history of the Democrats being elected up and down the ballot. Well, now it's becoming difficult for Democrats to get elected. And I look to people like Jake Day here in Salisbury, the mayor. I talk about him all over the state of Maryland. He's a veteran. He's someone who's full of common sense. He's willing to work with anybody, Republicans or independents, to get the job done. And it's not rocket science if you show up as an elected official, if you do your job as an elected official, if you're a fiscal moderate as an elected official, and if you're not one of these light your hair on fire partisans who's constantly trying to tear the other guy down. I think you can succeed. And I know some people will say, gee, at the beginning of this interview, Don, old Franchot was railing about Trump. I put Trump in a completely different category. This is not normal what's going on down there, and it has nothing to do with Republicans and Democrats and partisanship. That my concern with him is just it's pretty specific to who he is. So, but underneath that, there is absolutely no reason why we as Democrats need to go and chastise and demonize Republicans. We have our own story to tell. It's a good story. We should tell it. We should let the chips fall where they may. After the elections, we should look at the other side and say, we may disagree with you on things, but we're not going to tear you down. And we're not going to do the dysfunction that's going on down there in Washington. We're going to roll up our sleeves and work together like the World War II generation, my dad, like he did. And, he's always looking at me and saying, what's the matter with you?
On that note, we've been speaking with Maryland Comptroller Peter Franchot. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Thank you, Don.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Frank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.